Most people still don't realize what's happening right now. They scroll past the charts, the headlines, the endless noise, never connecting the dots between technology, money, and timing. But for the few who do, owning 3,000 XRP today could end up being one of the most important financial decisions of their lives. This isn't a promise, it's a probability. One that gets smaller every day as the world wakes up to how fast the financial system is changing. The window is closing, quietly but quickly, and the signs are everywhere for those who know how to read them. Welcome back to Crypto Equation, where we strip away the noise and decode the real story behind the markets. Tonight, we're breaking down why 3,000 XRP matters, what's driving this opportunity, and why time, not hype, is the biggest factor working against latecomers. Let's start with perspective. 3,000 XRP doesn't sound like much. At a few dollars per coin, it's a position almost anyone could build. But the reason it matters has nothing to do with price today. It's about leverage on inevitability. Every major technological revolution follows the same pattern: disbelief, resistance, adoption, dominance. The internet, smartphones, cloud computing, they all started as ideas too early for most people to understand. Now they run the world. XRP is in that same transitional phase. It's not about speculation anymore. It's about infrastructure, a bridge between the old financial rails that still move quadrillions every year and the new digital systems that will soon replace them. Ripple spent a decade building partnerships with banks, payment companies, and central banks to make that bridge real. And for the first time, all the external conditions are aligning: regulation, liquidity, technology, and global necessity. That's what makes this moment different. Think about how global finance actually works. When you send money abroad, it moves through a labyrinth of correspondent banks using a 50-year-old system called SWIFT. It's slow, expensive, and vulnerable to delays. In an economy measured in milliseconds, that's unacceptable. Now, after decades of inertia, the entire world is upgrading to a new standard called ISO 2022, a digital messaging language that lets money move as data. Every major central bank and commercial bank is transitioning to it right now. Ripple's technology, and XRP itself, was designed around this exact standard years before it became mandatory. That's not luck, that's foresight. And it means that while legacy banks are scrambling to modernize, Ripple's network is already compatible. This is where owning XRP becomes more than just holding a token. It's owning a piece of the bridge that those institutions will need to cross to survive the next era of finance. But here's the part most retail investors miss: adoption doesn't announce itself. It creeps in through pilots, partnerships, and integrations until one day it's everywhere. When you finally hear breaking news that banks are using XRP, the easy accumulation phase will already be gone. That's why 3,000 XRP matters now. It's the threshold that puts an ordinary investor on the right side of history before the crowd arrives. At today's prices, it's attainable. After mass adoption, it might not be. Zoom out to the macro picture. We're living through the most aggressive monetary reset in modern history. Interest rate cycles, debt levels, and digital currency experiments are converging in a way no generation has ever seen. Governments are racing to issue CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, built on blockchain technology. Corporations are tokenizing real-world assets worth trillions. And the plumbing that connects all of this together has to be fast, compliant, and liquid. That's exactly what XRP was built for. Unlike most cryptocurrencies, XRP isn't trying to replace the banking system. It's upgrading it. That's why central banks, payment processors, and even remittance companies are quietly testing Ripple's rails. David Schwartz, Ripple's CTO, recently said something that slipped past most headlines. Every central bank exploring digital currency eventually faces the same challenge: interoperability. We already solved that. In other words, while the world debates which CBDC will dominate, Ripple already built the universal translator. If that infrastructure goes mainstream, and the data suggests it's starting to, liquidity will need to flow through a neutral asset that can settle instantly across all networks. That asset is XRP. Now let's talk about why the window is closing. There's a concept in investing called information asymmetry, the gap between those who understand a change early and those who realize it too late. That gap is where wealth is created. Right now, XRP still sits in that gap. A few years ago, regulatory uncertainty kept institutions away. Then the US court ruling clarified that XRP isn't a security when traded on exchanges. That single decision flipped the switch from off limits to integrate ready. Since then, exchange volumes have risen, new corridors have opened, and Ripple has expanded into asset tokenization, carbon credit markets, and cross-bank settlement. The shift is happening quietly, but it's happening fast. And each day that passes, the asymmetry shrinks. More people learn, more institutions connect, and more liquidity migrates. That's what the window closing really means. Not a countdown on a chart, but the erosion of early mover advantage. Once everyone understands, there's no edge left. To grasp what 3,000 XRP could represent, let's run a simple scenario. Assume Ripple's technology captures just a small share of the $150 trillion global cross-border payment market. Even a fraction of 1% would create daily settlement volumes in the billions. If XRP serves as the bridge for that liquidity, demand increases exponentially. Now combine that with supply dynamics. XRP has a fixed cap of 100 billion coins, and roughly half are already in circulation. As utility expands, available supply on exchanges decreases because institutions lock up tokens for operational liquidity. Basic economics takes over. Rising demand, constrained supply. That's how revaluations start. No one can predict exact prices, but the math is clear. At scale, even modest adoption could reprice XRP by multiples. Owning 3,000 XRP isn't about chasing a number. It's about owning functional exposure to that transformation before institutional flows absorb the liquidity. Another overlooked element is psychological readiness. Markets reward patience disguised as conviction. Most retail traders don't lose because they pick the wrong asset. They lose because they can't sit still long enough for fundamentals to matter. Owning 3,000 XRP means nothing if you panic sell every dip. It means everything if you understand what you own. That's why education beats speculation. If you know that Ripple's rails are ISO 2022 compliant, that central banks are testing CBDCs on similar architectures, that tokenization is moving trillions of dollars on chain, then you see volatility as opportunity, not danger. You see time as leverage, not as a threat. Now here's a truth very few talk about. Institutional adoption doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with paperwork. It comes with compliance audits, pilot programs, and months of integration testing. That's what Ripple has been doing while the retail crowd fixates on price. And that's why the real story isn't on trading charts. It's buried in corporate press releases and regulatory filings. Behind the scenes, Ripple has signed partnerships across Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and Latin America. Each new region adds corridors. Each corridor adds liquidity. Each liquidity loop reinforces XRP's relevance. At some point, scale becomes self-sustaining. When that tipping point hits, the narrative flips overnight. The asset everyone ignored becomes the backbone everyone depends on. When that shift happens, it won't look like a movie premiere or a breaking news alert. It'll feel more like the lights turning on in a room you didn't realize was dark. One day you'll see headlines about major banks using RippleNet. A few months later, exchanges will report liquidity surges you can't explain. Then suddenly, XRP won't be just another ticker symbol. It'll be infrastructure. That's when the masses will rush in. But by then, the easy part, the quiet accumulation, the patient conviction, will be gone. Those who understood early will already be positioned. Those who hesitated will watch from the sidelines wondering how they missed it. That's why the phrase, "the window is closing," matters so much. It's not fear, it's fact. Adoption curves always reward those who act before they become obvious. There's another reason why this moment is special. We're entering a new liquidity cycle. Analysts like Tom Lee and others on Wall Street are forecasting rate cuts and renewed capital inflows into risk assets. When liquidity expands, it doesn't stop at stocks. It eventually finds its way into digital assets. And when that happens, utility tokens like XRP attract disproportionate attention because they sit at the crossroads of technology and finance. Think about it. Bitcoin represents store of value. Ethereum represents programmability. XRP represents movement, the ability to transfer value instantly anywhere on Earth. In a world obsessed with speed, the asset that moves money fastest wins. This is the macro backdrop Ripple has been waiting for since its inception. Low interest rates encourage cross-border lending. Tokenization pulls traditional finance onto blockchain rails. And banks racing to meet ISO 2022 deadlines discover that Ripple's technology is already fluent in the new standard. That's not luck, it's design. For the average investor, though, the choice is simple. Believe that progress stops here, or believe that technology keeps evolving. History answers that for us. The telegraph gave way to email, film cameras to smartphones, taxis to ride-sharing. Finance is the last great system running on analog rails, and those rails are rusting. Every government report, IMF white paper, and central bank conference in the last 2 years points in the same direction: instant, programmable, interoperable money. And every time those institutions test interoperability, Ripple's technology is in the conversation. You can ignore that pattern, or you can recognize it as momentum. Owning 3,000 XRP isn't about gambling on a moonshot. It's about planting a flag in the middle of that momentum while it's still forming. Let's imagine how this might unfold over the next few years. As central banks finalize their CBDCs, they'll need bridges to connect national systems. Ripple's private ledger technology already provides that bridge. Commercial banks, meanwhile, will keep chasing cost savings and settlement because margins are everything in a high-rate world. RippleNet's on-demand liquidity eliminates pre-funded accounts, releasing billions in trapped capital. Once a few big players adopt it publicly, competitive pressure will force the rest to follow. At that point, XRP's role as the neutral bridge asset becomes standard procedure, and that's when valuation begins to reflect utility. Price isn't the driver, it's the consequence. The function comes first, recognition follows. When you own 3,000 XRP, you're not betting on speculation, you're positioned for recognition. But make no mistake, patience is the toll you pay for that position. Markets will test conviction. There will be dips, delays, and distractions. Regulators will posture, analysts will argue, and fear will trend on social media. That's all noise. The signal is in the code, the partnerships, and the infrastructure quietly expanding underneath the headlines. Schwartz once said, "The best technology doesn't win because it's loud, it wins because it works." That's Ripple's entire strategy. Build what works, prove it quietly, scale globally. And right now, it's working. Consider how small 3,000 XRP actually is compared with what it represents. If global liquidity migrates even partially to networks like RippleNet, each token will be responsible for facilitating more and more value. That leverage, value moved per unit held, is what makes this asset unique. Imagine explaining to someone in 2030 that you had the chance to own a few thousand units of the network that powers instant global payments, and you passed because the market was quiet. That's how hindsight feels. Every revolution looks boring before it looks obvious. So here's the truth about owning 3,000 XRP. It's not about a guaranteed payday. It's about participation in the shift. It's about understanding that money is going digital whether anyone likes it or not, and that the world will need neutral, liquid assets to make that transition work. The opportunity isn't forever. Each new integration, each corridor opened, each partnership signed, reduces the gap between awareness and adoption. That's why the smartest investors don't wait for confirmation. They act on comprehension. And if you still wonder whether this moment is real, look at the behavior of institutions. In 2023, almost no major US financial company would even discuss blockchain publicly. By 2025, they're hosting panels on digital asset liquidity. Ripple executives are sitting next to IMF delegates, BIS researchers, and national bank governors. That's not crypto hype. That's infrastructure policy. And every conversation pushes XRP closer to the mainstream. So yes, the window is closing, but that's the good news. It means adoption is accelerating. It means what was once theory is becoming reality. And it means that those holding a modest stake today may soon find themselves in possession of something the rest of the market suddenly values. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to Crypto Equation, where we connect the dots between crypto, finance, and the next era of money. Comment below, how long do you think the accumulation window for XRP will stay open? And what do you believe 3,000 XRP could represent 5 years from now? Whatever your answer, remember this: opportunities don't vanish. They simply move to the people who are ready. Be early, be informed, and never underestimate the power of timing. This is Crypto Equation, and I'll see you in the next one.